Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Hailey Nelson. I am so happy that you came to join us today for our Safe Kids Central California Lunch and Learn episode. We are going to be talking about home safety, and I have a friend of mine, Dr. Nikki Webb, who has joined in, and she not only is she another pediatrician, but she's also a mom and then co-safety expert with me. So I'm so excited that she's here. We're going to be talking about some different things. So initially, when we were planning for this episode and kind of going through the list of what we talk about when home safety came up, I was like, oh, I've got this down because I have a toddler and I did the childproofing. But then it turns out there's other safety things to think about when you have children of all ages, especially now that our kids are out of school and so home more this summer. So Dr. Nikki Webb, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Hailey. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I still struggle a year into the pandemic at looking at the camera on Zoom rather than at the screen. So apologies to everybody watching.
It's okay. But hey, with being on Zoom, I mean, I've been in meetings with you where we're both at home and there's children in the background. So sometimes there's some chaos, sometimes there's some distractions, and kids can get into things. And so that's really why we need to talk about how do we keep our environment at home safe for them, because we know that if you give them just a little bit of downtime, they might find something that they could get into that maybe they shouldn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that as a mom, I have realized a lot of what I've been preaching for years in a very personal way during this pandemic. I think both of us have had the experience of sitting in an environment like this, trying to be professional and then hoping that no one will notice what's going on in the background or hoping our kids aren't getting into things. And so as we got into the pandemic and we started to see more and more reports of unintentional injuries, particularly of toddlers, but children of all ages, it made us really think about how we talk about injury prevention at a time when kids are home a lot more than they might otherwise be. And it makes you realize that there's other hazards that maybe don't get thought about or don't get talked about as much as they should. And so I think that's one of the things that we want to do today is to broaden the scope a little bit of what we talk about with hazard prevention.
Yeah, broadening that scope. So we're actually going to start outside your home because the weather is nice and yard maintenance. So turns out there's a whole safety thing that we're supposed to know about lawnmowers and the ages at which to allow children and some of the other precautions to make sure that you don't get an injury just while taking care of your yard. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it brings up a lot of childhood memories. So I will admit that I have, we hire that work out at our house, but I was the hired help when I was a kid. And I distinctly remember getting bits of yard material flung onto my legs and having little teeny tiny scars from things being flying out the side of the lawnmower. And so on the other side of that, as a parent and as a pediatrician, we talk a lot about wearing appropriate clothing. So if your children are going to be using weed whackers or edgers or lawnmowers, they really should have long pants on and ideally something thick like denim. It should be a child who's old enough to operate that kind of equipment. So somebody like, 12 or up, you want to still be supervising them because it's a motorized sharp blade that can do some damage. And it's the kind of thing that, you might not otherwise think about, but it's hot here. Particularly, I think with different priorities that folks have had to make in terms of costs in the last year, there's probably a lot of people who maybe did used to hire out their yard maintenance and are now doing that themselves. And my dad definitely didn't pay as close attention to me as maybe he should have when I was using a weed whacker or a lawnmower as a kid, and I have the scars on my legs to prove it. So trying to avoid our kids being in the same situation.
Yeah, those closed-toed shoes and just kind of thinking about how that blade can really send a rock or send something flying. So even like eye protection sometimes, and children want to copy us. And so I know, like we've got the little bubble lawnmower for our toddler, and she loves it. And so kids see that, but that is the toy. But then when it comes to the actual equipment that has a blade that is moving quickly enough to cut grass but can cut other things, that's really where again that safety piece comes in. And so kind of in thinking about that and moving into the home, there are things where children see something as a toy, but then there are things that are not toys. So what are some other inside the home safety tips that you want to make sure that parents are thinking about for the summer?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, right? As pediatricians, we actually often ask parents about hazards in the home, and we kind of sometimes assume that we're both thinking of the same list. Like most of us will think of things like kitchen knives, medications, cleaning products, things like Tide Pods, I think have emerged a lot in the last few years, or detergent pods, excuse me, as a potential hazard. One of the things that often doesn't get thought of, but that can be a hazard, and that's a fairly common thing to have in a home, is actually a firearm or a gun. And I think that there are lots of reasons why people choose to have guns, and that those are very important and very personal choices that families make. One thing we have noticed in this past year as children are spending more time at home is we've seen a significant increase actually in toddlers, particularly finding guns and gaining access to them and then injuring themselves or even killing themselves or another child. And so that's on that list of things that maybe doesn't get talked about as much. And I think it's important for us to talk about safely storing our guns to prevent those types of injuries.
Yeah. So if there is a gun in the home, what are the steps parents should take to make sure that it's safely stored so that their toddler or their older child, that really no one who isn't certified to use that gets in handle of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just for any parents who are listening, if somebody like myself or Dr. Nelson asks you this, I think we are all on the same team, and it's team safety. And lots of people make different choices for themselves. Kids are really curious, and we see this time and time again. So young children really can't be safely trusted to be around a gun. And we really actually encourage that they not touch or handle a gun even in the presence of an adult. Older children, that's a different story, but with our younger children, we recommend that the gun be stored in a place that the child doesn't have access to, unloaded, separate from the ammunition, which should also be locked up. And that way that if they were to gain access to the gun, it would be essentially an inanimate object. So safe storage and secure storage is the most important thing that we recommend. And a lot of times parents will tell me that they don't think their kids know, but I've had the experience, unfortunately, multiple times in my career of kids know more than we think. Anyone who's ever had their kids find the Christmas presents that were hidden in the closet probably knows that. And so we really do recommend that that's a secure location and not just a secret location. That's the most important thing. And then I think other things that we really want to emphasize are modeling responsible behavior. So, and I think our parents know this and do this well, so that children, if they are old enough to where maybe they have handled the gun or had an experience, if they, for example, go hunting with their family, that they know that that's still a serious device and that it's not a toy and it should be treated respectfully. And parents, it's important for us to model in our children who are old enough to perhaps handle a firearm, that we are showing them that we acknowledge that it could be dangerous in the wrong hands and that we do want to store it securely. I think that's another critical thing. One thing that I've had the personal experience of as a mom is needing to remember to actually ask when my child goes to another environment. So I know what my home environment is like. But how often do we ask about all the different things, when our kids go to someone else's house? Is there a pool? Who's going to be supervising them? How much screen time? But asking if they have unsecured firearms, because that's really what we care about, right? Not whether or not someone owns a firearm, but whether or not it's safely stored. And so asking other parents when your kids are going to go on a play date, which as we're starting to open up again and children are interacting more, is hopefully a thing that we will see more of, right? Children going on play dates and going to birthday parties. And so it's that asking is really important. And, I could go on all day, but I want to see what other questions you have, Dr. Nelson.
Well, no, I like that in the asking too. I think some of it comes to practicing that. So the first time you ask another parent, it might come out of your mouth and feel a little awkward. Like if you haven't had it, or if you don't know that family very well, you're like, oh geez, like I don't want them to not like us, or as it's almost like it's this weird dynamic of like, we want our kids to have friends, but like I want a mommy friend too. Like, and so how do we like meet that? But how important that is. And we unfortunately see what happens when these questions aren't asked, which is why we're recommending that you ask. And so finding your way of being able to ask, just like if your kid has food allergies, and so you ask about the peanuts, and if you start practicing it, and so it's something that just rolls out of your mouth, the easier it becomes to ask and the less awkward it feels for you. And then it's not going to catch them off guard either, that this is just hey, just like we talk about helmets, we talk about other things, like I'm asking this question before our kids come over to play, sort of thing. So really trying to normalize how to ask that question, which can feel a little weird at first, but definitely is worthwhile for the asking. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm glad you brought that up because it actually does take practice. And so some of the volunteer work I do is around educating families and teachers and preschool directors and all kinds of people who interact with children about how to have these conversations. And we actually role play because it is something, the way you ask the question, if you have a 5-year-old and they're going to go to a play date is maybe different than how you'd ask if you have a teenager and they might have an unsupervised sleepover. And so it does with everything in life. If you can practice things that you're nervous about or that you think might be awkward, it really helps. And then I also think giving credit to people, it's for thinking the best, right? So, trusting that you care deeply about your child and the child of your friend who you might be having bring their child over to your house, trusting that they feel the same way about your child and that you're approaching things from a place of safety. And so I think that conversation does look different when you're talking about teenagers, because this is an age group that may be comfortable around guns and that may be part of their family culture. And we see that a lot with our families here, especially in the Valley. And that's something that I think a lot of people hold very dear, and they should. And one of the things that becomes a little challenging is particularly during this past year where we've had, I think as adults, more stressors than many of us have experienced in our lives. We've seen that a lot in our teen population. We've seen many more visits to Valley Children's Emergency Department and to the inpatient hospital for mental health concerns for teens that have tried even to kill themselves. And so if you have a teenager or you know of a teenager who maybe otherwise would be perfectly responsible around something like a gun or another lethal weapon, but you're worried they're struggling, that is probably a time to go back to how you might have approached it when they were 2 or 3 and really make sure that they don't have access to that gun. And that's another thought and another potential conversation that I think it's important to think about before you find yourself in the middle of it, so that you can think about how you're going to have that. If you're a concerned friend of another parent, or if you're that parent yourself or a grandparent, how are you going to have that conversation and what words are you going to say is something you probably want to think about before you're in the middle of it. So practice is really key.
Practice is key. And thanks for bringing up the mental health reminder too. So I know we just wrapped up May as Mental Health Awareness Month. And so certainly bringing attention to the fact that the pandemic has impacted all of us. And so how we move forward. And if you do have someone who is experiencing distress and you're worried about them, how to ensure their safety in your home or when they're in other homes, just to make sure that nothing happens to that person that you love. Because that's again, when we step back and it's our love for our children, for these other individuals, and why safety becomes so important, because we don't want people to get hurt. So that's really why we're talking about these things. Now, Dr. Webb, I know you've got your button. Did you want to also tell us the mnemonic for SMART?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry. So this stands for be smart. I realize people can't probably see very well, but the S is secure your guns in your home or vehicle. And again, that's kind of what we talked about. So not just out of sight, but really truly secured, locked up. Modeling responsible behavior. So making sure those older children do know that it's a serious device and it's a weapon and not a toy, and that younger children probably shouldn't talk about them at all. Asking about the presence of guns in other environments your children might play or stay in. So that's the A. R is recognizing the role that guns play in teen suicide. And unfortunately, that's an increasing role that we've seen, especially in the last decade in this country, and even more in the last year. And then T is tell your friends. And that's the practice part that Dr. Nelson and I have been talking about. So really share this idea. It's an easy to remember mnemonic. We can put it in the resources, but sharing it with your friends, normalizing it so that the nervousness and the fear goes away. And I think sometimes when we talk about intimidating topics, people get concerned. And we really, all of us love our children, all of us as parents and pediatricians and nurses and teachers and doctors and everything in between, we want to keep our society safe. And so we have to kind of share this type of information and then normalize it so those conversations become less intimidating.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing the SMART mnemonic. And then I know we've got lots of resources. We're going to be including the link for this video. Before we wrap up today, there was one other safety topic we were going to cover in terms of home safety, and that was actually windows. So do you want to tell me why windows made the list and what parents should know about that from a safety standpoint for the summer?
Yes, and thank you for the reminder. So just to use my own family as an example. So again, I think windows are one of those things that we don't think as much about as a hazard, or if you grew up on the East Coast like I do, and it's much more common to have multi-story houses rather than single-story houses like we a lot of times have here, then you probably grew up with with your parents being afraid that you might fall out of a window. Here in the Valley, I think because it's hot and people keep their windows closed and have the air conditioning on, sometimes we forget that those are still a hazard. But my now 6-year-old was really jealous that her sister was getting to go on a play date a couple years ago and couldn't figure out how to unlock the front door, but she did figure out how to push out the screen in one of our downstairs windows and actually got out of the window and started walking down the street before thankfully one of our neighbors, which again, staying close to your neighbors is really important, found her. And it really made me think differently about this everyday item that's all over your house, right? And so obviously there's a lot of different hazards with windows, but I think making sure that they're closed and locked if you have young children, making sure that you have appropriately fitted screens if you have particularly higher, if you have a multi-story dwelling, that they're in good condition, they can't be easily moved. Having safety locks on them, particularly for younger children. I think it's a trope, at least it was a trope probably when Dr. Nelson and I were growing up, about teens sort of escaping out the window to go on, on a secret, clandestine adventure or something. And certainly neither of us ever did that. But it's interesting. A window is a hazard that I think a lot of people don't often think about. And unfortunately, we have seen children here who have been injured, particularly as a result of falls out of higher windows. So those are the ones that we worry the most about, but don't discount the ground floor window and your toddler trying to escape out of it. I learned that from personal experience.
Well, I'm glad you had neighbors who caught your toddler, and it's even something to think about if they could get into the backyard, like if there's a window we talked about for the pool safety episode, yes. And that the fence really has to be all the way around all four sides of the pool, because that same issue of if there's a window that then can get into the pool area, how they can figure out, because it looks like fun and that's where they want to go. So really being mindful of that. And then again, those upstairs windows and those all hazards for having the lock so that it can't open all the way, or how you set that up, but just kind of in doing a survey. And so I hope for the parents who have tuned in today that it really kind of, we've talked about a variety of different things, but it really is just kind of looking at your home with a different lens for what are some areas where you might have overlooked, and whether it's your yard equipment, whether it's the storage of your firearm, whether it is those windows, or if there's something else. I mean, we certainly have more safety topics coming to you, and we're happy to do a deeper dive into any of these and kind of explain the whys and give more tips. But that there's lots of things as parents, and it can be overwhelming, but putting some intention into it and doing that survey can really be beneficial, both for your stress level as a parent. Mm-hmm. So I joke about you guys are going to cause me to have gray hair when they do things, and it makes you, worry, but then also for the safety of your child. And so I think it goes twofold. So thank you, Dr. Webb, for joining in today and for sharing all of those highlights. We'll get those resources included in our link, and then we'll be back live next week on our regularly scheduled day. So next Wednesday, we're going to be covering Stop the Bleed with Dr. Tamora. And then the following week, we're going to be, I'm hoping to head out to the lake, because we're going to be discussing open water safety. So we covered pool safety. We've got that video uploaded already, but we're going to be talking about other forms of water that you might be around and how to protect your children there. So please stay tuned, like and follow us on Facebook so that you can stay up to date with Safe Kids Central California. Again, I'm Dr. Hailey Nelson, Dr. California America, and happy to be bringing these Lunch and Learn episodes to you. So everyone stay safe and be well.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Nelson.